Okay, so we're going to continue to add some more features to the cash register application. First, before we begin, I'm going to point out a common error that you'll see pop up as you use Anvil applications. It doesn't stop the application from running, but you'll see when you edit event handlers, you might, if you misstep at any point, you might get this warning. In this case, you can see it's telling us that on Form 1, the pressed enter handler doesn't exist. And it gives us this cue that says try set pressed enter event handler for the text box 1 widget on Form 1. So let's take a look at that. On this text box total, where is that one? It's a text box total press enter. So you can see we've got this handler here that's listed to run. This is a function or a method that's supposed to run whenever the user presses enter on this total. And of course, we're not having the user click on that enter field at this point. So if we look at the code, that function or that method doesn't exist. We do have a text box price press enter handler so that when the user selects or clicks enter on the price field, it does add some, it does add a handler there. But as you edit your applications, if you've created a handler for any widget, for any event, for any widget, and then either change that event handler name or delete that handler eventually for some reason, you also need to delete the name of that method from the event handler in the user interface properties panel. So here, if we delete that, you can see because there is no function, it's just telling us, hey, there's no method to handle that. If we rerun this now that that reference to a function that doesn't exist or a method that doesn't exist, we no longer get that warning. So just a quick point, you're going to see that warning come up, and it may be not so easy to figure out if you don't, if you're not aware of how to handle that warning. So very simple to do. Just go to the widget that it points to and delete the handler down in the properties. Okay, so let's add some new functionality to the app. What we want to do now is take the items that are displayed in the repeating panel and save that list of item and prices to a database table and along with the dates so that later we can perform a sales total, a report total for any given period with start and end dates. So the first thing we're going to do to make that happen is add a button to the layout. And what we'll do is also add a little separator here, so it's separated visually. And let's give this button name. We'll call it save. And let's make the role primary color. And let's go to full alignment so that it takes up the total width of the page. Okay, and we'll double click on this to add event to handler. And you can see in the code now we've got a handler for when that button is clicked. I'm going to go over to the Python tutorial at pythonanvil.com, and we're going to copy this code, and we will set it so that it runs when that handler is called, when that method is called. Indent it and take out the duplicate line there. Okay, let's take a look at what this method does. So when that button is clicked, we're going to add a row to a table called sales, and a data table called sales, and we're going to set the receipt column of that data table to be equal to the items property of the repeating panel. So all the items that are displayed in the repeating panel. That's usually a dictionary or a dictionary of, or a list of dictionaries. It could also be a list. So we're also going to set the date time column to the current date time. And in order for that date time method to run, we need to import it from the Python standard library. So let's do that now. Import date time. And in order for that function to run, for that method to run, we're going to use the date time module here. Let's do that. Okay, now let's look at this again. We have a sales data table, and it's going to have a receipt and a date time column. Let's go over to our database manager. Table 1, we will call this sales, and we'll add a column, and that column is going to contain a dictionary or a list of dictionaries. So that's going to be a simple object column. Any sort of JSON data that you want to add to a database, select the simple object column type. And I think we called that receipt. Type it correctly and try and spell it correctly. And then we're going to add a date time column to hold the current time. And I think we called that date time. Throughout these lessons, you'll see it sometimes called date time, sometimes called timestamp or something of the sort. Okay, so now we've got a simple object column named receipt and a date and time column named date time. Let's look back at our code. So go up into the app, click on form 1, and let's read through the code here. Make sure we've got this right. Receipt is set to the self panel 1 items. Date time is set to the current time using the datetime.now method. And then a few other things happen in this method. The user will be alerted with a message that says saved. And then just some general cleanup will happen. The text in the subtotal text and total text boxes will be set to an empty string. The item text box will be focused so the cursor goes back there so the user can continue entering a new receipt. And also the items property, all the items in the repeating panel is set to an empty list so that it no longer displays any information from the previous receipt. So basically clearing the previous receipt. Anytime we save one, that clears the screen out. So the user doesn't have to clear any of those fields manually. Okay, let's run this and see what we get. Let's add a hammer. 19. Okay. It's calculating the subtotal tax and total. Click the save button. And okay, so we get our first little error here. Let's see what Anvil is telling us. So this is about app permissions. And permission is denied. You can't write to the table sales from client code. So you've seen that in the previous examples. Let's stop this, go up into our data table manager, click on the sales form, and look at the permissions. Currently, forms are not provided any access to the database. So again, we'll switch this over to can search, edit, and delete. Now we can make those changes to the database from form code, from front-end code. Run this. Try adding our hammer again. $19. Save it. And blammo, we get a alert telling us it's been saved. So let's go back to our database, take a look at that data table, the sales data table. And here we go. We've got in the receipt column for that receipt, a single dictionary where the item is set to hammer and the price is set to 19 and the date time is set to the current date of that transaction. We can change that here if you want. Notice that the date and time is both set in that column. Okay, so now we've got the receipts being saved to a database. Let's do this one more time. Maybe we'll add some nails for $10 and a screwdriver for $5. And we have some formatting to do here, but you can see the calculations are handled appropriately. We can just use a Python format to round that out properly. Okay, let's take a look. I didn't manage to save that, so we'll do it one more time. Nails. There's $10 and screwdriver, make that $5. And then this time, let's hide our console, click the save button, gives us the save message. Let's look at the data table. And for that transaction, you can see now we have 2 dictionaries saved in one list. Item set to nails, price of 10, and screwdriver set to a price of 15 on the current transaction date. Okay, so now we've got some information in the database. Let's begin to make a report that the user can use to calculate sales totals between any given date and time. So we're going to need to add another page where we'll run that report and allow the user to select drop-down date pickers. So let's make a link to that page. And here we'll add a form. We'll make it a standard page, and we'll rename it to report. And then let's go back to our form 1 and make a link to that page. So we'll drop a link widget up here, and let's give that some text. So we'll call this report. And when the link is clicked, let's give this a handler, and we'll have this do an open form. And you can see this is autocomplete is helping me out here to write things really quickly. I'll select the report page. So now when we run this, we should be able to click the report page, and it should open up a report page, which is currently empty. So let's go back to our form 1. We want the actual form 1, not the item template. And that's going to open our form. So we'll go to report. And on a report page, we need to select a start and end date. So I'm going to drag 2 date widgets onto the layout. And I'm also going to drag a couple of labels to show the user what's expected there. Let's make those label widgets a little bit smaller. And we'll also right align the text. So we'll have a start date that the user can select. And we'll also have an end date. And so that sits directly next to the date picker widget will align the text right. And same thing for the start date, align that right. And then when this, okay, so you can see I accidentally moved this. All we need to do is click undo. Okay, so now when those dates are selected, we want to have a button to run the report. So let's drag the button down. And again, I'm going to put a little separator here just so it's nice and separated from the rest of the layout, a little spacer. And we'll put some text on this button. Maybe we'll say run report. Again. Okay. And let's give that a role of primary color. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now when we run the report, again, we can either, to create an event handler, go to the click event, or we can just double click on the button, and that will create a new button 1 click handler. Okay, for that handler, I'm going to go back over and grab some more code. And just a few lines here. Let's take a look at this. We want to put that into our button 1 handler and make sure that it is indented properly. Okay, so what happens here when we click on the run report button, creating a new variable, sales total, which is what we want to calculate, setting that initially to 0. And then we're using a for loop to go through all the rows that are returned by a search of the sales table in our app tables. And a little conditional here. If for each of those rows, if the date time field is greater than or equal to the date on date picker 1, and the row is less than or equal to the date in date picker 2, then we'll run this code for each item in the row receipt. So remember, we have a list of dictionaries in that receipt column, in that receipt field. What we're going to do is add to our sales total the price for that item. So it'll run through all those items. Now I'm noticing something here. In our database, we have both the date and the time, and currently the default value for a date picker is just the date, not a date and time. So we're going to have to change that. When that for loop is done, we're going to alert the user with the sales total. So they see that sales total, the total number of sales for a given period, and then it'll automatically go back to form 1 so you can continue entering sales. So if we run this now, you're going to see that there is a mismatch between the value that's entered. Let's do this. The report, we'll set it to today or even before today, and then run the report, and you see we get this error. Type error can't compare date time to date. And it shows us exactly where that is. Report line 17. So in our design here, let's do these code snippets. Let's clear this up a little bit so we can really see what we're doing. Design. On the design for the widget, let's open up this property panel, and you can see that there's an option to pick the time. So now when the user selects a date from the date picker, there's also an option to select the time, and that gives us a different type of Python value, date time value, as opposed to just a date value. Let's run this again. Open it up. We'll hide our console here and run the report page. Select a start date. Now you can see there's a date time there. Apply it. And let's run this again and make sure that we have a later date selected. Apply it, run the report, and we currently get 0. So let's see where the error is occurring. We're going to go to the code for this page and make sure that everything is properly identified. Date picker 1 date, date picker 2 date. We are looking in the date time column of the database, and we're looking in the receipt column of the database. We're using the proper variable here. Okay, so let's run this again, make sure we get a proper selection of dates. Look at our sales table, and the date time for those transactions is January 7th. So I'll start the report on January 6th, and I'll end it on January 8th. Make sure that we have the dates set properly. So go back to report, start. We'll set this to January 6th to be the first start date, and then we'll send this to sometime after that. We'll try the 14th. Run the report, and now we get proper receipt totals. These are all of the items that are in all of those rows of the database. And just to be clear, one more time, I'm going to just point out that within the receipt column, we have a list of items on each of the receipts. So in our for loop, we're going through the value that's in the receipt column, and then we're going through that list in a separate for loop. So let's take it look at that code once really quick. Go back to our design view here, click on form 1, and actually click on the report form. So we're going through the rows of that sales table and comparing the date and time. If it's between the start and end dates, then we go through another for loop, which is going through each of the items in that saved list in the receipt column. So that receipt column holds all of the items on each transaction. And so for each of those items that's in that single row, We're taking the price and adding it to the sales total. So that gives us a total of all the items saved. And with that, we've got a working, basic, very minimal cash register application. The point of which is to really show how to use the database tables, how to use some of the layout widgets, and perform these sorts of operations. This is not an application meant for actual use, just an application that we're going to use here as a basis for how to perform these sorts of operations. So if you want to do this this sort of thing, we'll go through some much more complicated, less trivial examples in later lessons. But for now, you get a basic idea about how to perform these sorts of operations with the database and the user interface.